everybody. Today we're starting lesson 2.6, Heredity and the Environment. And by the end of the day, students will be able to determine how genetics and environment can impact behavior by explaining how dominant and recessive genes can impact heredity.
Okay, starting with genetics. Behavior genetics is the study, let me get my pen going. Behavior genetics is the study of genetics on behavior. So how does our heredity influence the way that we act and the way that we behave? So the first thing that they do is what we call genetic mapping. And the purpose of genetic mapping is to determine the location of specific genes and this is important because it's going to tell us personality traits. And it could even tell us talents like music. So I know a lot of researchers like to study genetics, and some of it's for scientific research in the medical field, but also we use it for behavioral to understand different behavior traits as well. So what exactly are they studying? Let's take a look at this image that we have right here in the center. You will see we have a cell. Inside of that cell is a nucleus. Within that nucleus, we have what we know as a chromosome, which is made up of our DNA. Our DNA, so we have 23 chromosomes. 23 pairs. So we actually have a total of 46 chromosomes. And our chromosomes are made up of our DNA. So within our chromosomes, we have our DNA. You can see there's two strands of the DNA that form a double helix. And really what we're trying to figure out are these genetics. These 23 chromosomes are our genes. And when we talk about genetic mapping, we're just trying to figure out which gene is responsible for which trait in a human. And that's our genetic mapping. We also have the study of epigenetics. And this is where we study heritable changes in gene expression. That do not involve modifications to the DNA sequence. So in other words, what are some things that we may inherit from our parents or from our ancestors that may not necessarily modify our DNA, but still involve genetics? So what is the impact of all this? So after we study this, what does this mean? Well, we take a look at how we knowing this information could impact our behavior. And the first thing that we know is that with family studies, we take a look at blood relatives. So these are relatives that have a blood relationship to you. And we know that if you are a blood relative, you have a 9% chance or a 9% risk of getting schizophrenia if someone else in your family has schizophrenia that is a blood relative. That's a pretty high significance. Remember, we said anything above 5% is statistically significant. So this is pretty statistically significant. We do a lot of studies with twins to determine genetics. And it's important to know that we study both identical and fraternal twins. Identical twins have one egg, where dizotic twins, fraternal twins, have two eggs. So mono means one, di means two. In this case, the reason why we like to study monozygotic twins is because they have the same DNA. And for dizygotic twins or fraternal twins, that's very similar. So it can help us have a strong understanding of what a genetic trait might be. We also love it when we can do adaptation studies because this can let us know the difference between your biology, so whether it is nature or nurture. So, do you have these traits because of the genetics that you were born with or because of the environment that you were raised in? To go into a little bit more on the nature versus nurture debate. So you can see over here where it says nature means the genetics determine our behavior, nurture means that environment determines our behavior. And we study this using twin studies to see which could be more influential in your development. And really, what heritability means is geneticists mathematically estimate how likely you are to inherit a characteristic based off of your nature or your genetics. And finally, Charles Darwin was super important to evolutionary psychology. He wrote a book called The Origin of Species, and that explained the why of evolutionary changes. And he realized a couple of things. First, that we have natural selection. Natural selection is the changes or the characteristics that happen for survival and reproductive advantages because we want to ensure our population. The second is adaptations. And these are characteristics that increase the population because it solved a problem of survival or reproduction during the time it emerged. Sickle cell is an example of an adaptation. It prevents people from getting malaria, so it helped solve the problem of survival. Mutation is a random error in gene replication. Behavior adaptations are adaptive traits that can also be applied to behavioral traits. We learn to do certain behaviors because it increased survival or reproduction. We sleep at night. This helps us with survival because realistically, we cannot live against predators at night. There are some critiques to evolutionary psychology, though. One is that they work backwards from the effect to describe the behavior. So we have the effect, and then we take a look at why we think that might have happened. There also can be a social consequence to evolutionary psychology, and it doesn't take a close enough look at cultural and social influences.